Hello, welcome to Talent Acquisition Trends and Strategy. Thank you for joining us today. I'm your host, James Mackey. Today, we are joined by Chris Samila. Chris is a friend of mine, and we're going to be talking about some really exciting stuff today. We're going to be talking about how to hire through community. Communities are popping up throughout, even in the tech industry and elsewhere, as a great resource for folks to build relationships and to advance professionally and develop their executive skill set. And they're also turning out to be quite an amazing resource to help folks move within their network and find new roles. So we're going to be talking about that. And then we're also going to be talking about the partnerships teams within companies. Primarily, we're going to be focused on the tech industry, but how to build partnerships teams properly. Really, what is a partnerships team? A lot of times people get it confused, and how to make the right partnership team hires for your organization to make sure that they can thrive and be successful. So anyways, really excited to jump into these topics. Chris, thank you so much for joining us today on the show.
No, it's awesome to be here. Thanks, James.
For sure. Thank you. And let's start with a little bit about yourself. Could you give us a quick background so the folks tuning in can have a bit of context surrounding your perspective and where you're coming from?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've spent almost my entire career in the tech industry. I started in the clean tech space and then moved into SaaS. I've generally had a background in sort of the partnerships realm of the business. And then 4 years ago, started a community that is focused actually in the partnership space. And we've become sort of the most prominent community globally for the partnerships profession. And so I kind of have an interesting dual perspective of sort of the partnerships world and all the facets of why it's growing and the technologies that support it, as well as this really exciting space known as community, which is now becoming a really big sort of opportunity for companies to leverage.
Yeah, thank you. I'm excited for you to provide more definitions on community, because I feel like, I mean, I have a pulse for it, and I'm part of your community. I'm a member of yours, partnership leaders, and I'm also part of a Pavilion. So I mean, I have a sense for it, but I feel like when I explain it, I'm kind of shooting from the hip a bit, but I'm looking forward for people to have a little bit more structured insight to the real value adds. And maybe I might've missed one or two, but yeah, I mean, I would like to just high level, right? Let's just talk about community for a minute, because it's something that I think is becoming a more central role in executives, strategy, if you will, or development, or it's just becoming part of how executives are interacting with other folks in their line of work. And I want to get your sense on the evolution you've seen when it comes to community, particularly for the tech industry over the past few years.
Yeah, I think there's 3 different distinct types of communities we see emerging. So one of them is, nonprofits and traditional sort of industry associations. A lot of times they're running maybe not on Slack or MS Teams, and it's more of async sort of communication more asynchronously. And it's been around for a very long time. And this is the component of this community is not new, but what is new is the environment these people engage on allows more instantaneous communication when you use, whether it's Slack, Teams, Discord, et cetera. And it can be very, very powerful because it increases the velocity at which people can create connections, and you can build other software on top of those platforms to create a ton of value for people. So you have these traditional kind of nonprofit organizations, you have companies creating communities, and you've seen, larger or tech companies will sometimes create a community around their user base, both from a product utilization perspective, how do you help people get the most value from their investment, but also if you can kind of be the hub of the what's happening in that industry, in that space, and helping those people get better at their job. And then the third type is these sort of for-profit organizations that are Pavilion partnership leaders. There's a growing number of these that is to some extent almost like the unbundling of LinkedIn. We've all run over to LinkedIn and created profiles, but the ability to extract value from that large of a global community is somewhat hard. And so you're seeing these sort of private communities emerge to serve the needs that in the industry.
Yeah, the unbundling of LinkedIn. That's a really interesting thought. So I was just slowing down on that. That might even make it in the title.
Yeah, I mean, it's I've definitely borrowed that from someone else over the last few years of as we sort of reflect on our own space, because this partnership leaders was passion project originally. It was just like, hey, wait a minute, like partnerships is hard. How do I more readily understand how to do this quicker? So because email and forums and things like that just were not fast enough when we are used to more instantaneous sort of gratification of connections and finding information. And so I think the thing we've seen over and over again, in whether it's partnerships or other industries, developers, marketing, et cetera, is you see these private communities emerging because there's such a high level of relevancy that everybody who's in there is kind of focused on the same area. Versus LinkedIn, you have a very broad group of humans, and the propensity to have people selling to each other, or maybe different levels of seniority or experience, you end up with a lot of different types of conversations, and you lose some of that relevancy. And so people start to disengage.
Right. And so for community right now, so there's you guys, there's Pavilion. What are the other, like, are there any other like really good private communities right now in the tech industry that are worth referencing?
Yeah, I mean, there's marketing ops, there's pre-sales collective, there's there's probably we're sort of in connections with about 12 of them that are trying to, in essence, find the right go-to-market motion that can support their space and still remain sort of neutral, where they're not owned by some larger tech company. They're really trying to help, whether it's SDRs or developers or marketing folks, helping those people get really good at their profession. And I think there's this concept of like almost like a platform for success. Like, how do I help the profession that I'm focused on get really good at their job, but also, network, investment opportunities. There's all these like other ancillary things you can bolt on if you have the audience that is focused on a certain profession. It's this interesting sort of new business emerging it is community. That's the root of it. But when you have that audience, you can do things that are very impactful for their lives, but also help you sort of get them more visibility. Like, we spend a lot of time thinking about like, how do we help the people that are really good at partnerships elevate their own professional brand, share experiences, share knowledge, and help kind of elevate them, because not everybody is really comfortable sharing on LinkedIn or hopping on a podcast or whatever it might be. But there's very talented people in every industry out there. So I think we're not alone here. These other communities are doing the same thing, where it's like, how do we help the folks have a voice, and then also collectively just like increase the knowledge of how to do things? Because every one of our industries, whether it's partnerships or other spaces, it's changing very, very quickly for all kinds of reasons. And so it's like, this peer-to-peer learning component is really essential to getting good at your job. You can't go buy a book on Amazon and expect to be at the cutting edge of how to do things.
Yeah, I like that too. You're always going to be like 5 years behind if you're just relying on I think books that, particularly for like business and stuff like that, there's just not enough resources out there. And even if there is something, it's going to be so generic and wide, right? And not catered toward a specific like exact community or industry or whatever you might be targeting. So I think that makes sense. And so just through the lens of career development, professional progression, relationships, finding new opportunities, I feel like that's also one of the biggest value adds of communities, is that, I did a poll actually on LinkedIn 2 months ago ish. And I asked, okay, for those of you in the tech industry, what percentage of you found your current role through a relationship? And then like, I think it was like relationships or network. Actually, I think it said network. Then there was like recruiters, job posts. I mean, there was a few things, right? And 79% of the people that participated said that they found their next role through their network, which I was kind of shocked. I was actually I own a embedded recruiting firm. I was like, damn it. I was like, I wish it was recruiters. No, I'm kidding. But it's just kind of funny because 79% is significant. It's well above the majority, right? I mean, so I think that that's really interesting. And I think that community is going to continuously play a bigger role in that, because as you said, it's like not this generic wide net. It's like folks that really understand what you do, that you can really connect with, that you're learning with. it's like the ultimate back channel, right? Like,
1,000%. Yeah, that's exactly what we're seeing. I mean, we see folks posting roles inside partnership leaders where they'll do that days to sometimes weeks ahead of the public listing, because we've already vetted that everybody's in PL has a background in this space, and there's a certain level of just investment that they're doing for their own professional life, because this is a paid thing, and so it's like it's almost like if you're in there, those people are serious about their profession. And so I'm sure this is happening in other communities where the hot stuff shows up probably first inside the community, and then it goes broad to go get the rest of the pool of applicants.
yeah. Oh, for sure, man. I think it's like, it's meeting folks, it's building the relationships, being able to really hopefully get a sense for people's competency just through building that relationship, right? And then also like the peer-to-peer learning, like, folks that are operating within the community might have access to resources. Not might, they do have access to resources that people that aren't involved in the community just don't have, right? And I think that the peer-to-peer learning, like I'm also, a member of Pavilion. I've taken the CRO school, the CMO school, really just to edify myself when it comes to more so being analytical, understanding how unit economics work, and thinking about scale from a unit economic perspective versus just like loosely looking at margins. And yeah, I think that'll about be right. Like let's just put together a budget and see how it goes. But we're being a lot more thoughtful about that. And that's been a great resource for me. And it's the relationships, it's the learning. And so it's good from, a revenue generation perspective, as well as just leveling up my skill set. So I'm actually going to be ready to take the company to the next level. So I just think that, for professionals out there, it's like such a great resource to continue to like stay on the cutting edge, as you said, right? With your skill set, to be aware of new technologies as they're coming out. I know like there's particularly like revenue roles, and I don't know if this is the same in partnerships, but a lot of people thinking about generative AI, chat GPT, things like that, how that's going to be baked into technology over the next 5 years, and how that's going to change SDR teams, the recruiter role, this type of stuff. And
Yeah.
so it's nice to have community where people are like thinking about this shit, right? And actually helping each other, right?
And the partner team is a lot of times the one that's actually the tip of the spear for some of the integrations on like the AI side of things. So it is definitely a hot topic in our space right now. I think to your earlier point about sort of that peer-to-peer learning and like the recognition of people that are contributing to the community, like I would hire someone probably more readily if I saw that they were contributing to the community. And I was like, okay, that person knows what they're talking about. They're out there, they're visible, especially in the partnerships world. It's an external facing role. So it's like, as much as it's also of course of internal facing, but like a component of like your livelihood is like, do they have a network? Do they, how well are they connected with folks? And so I think that visibility of someone, whether they're contributing inside the community or on LinkedIn, that sort of professional brand component is one way to kind of gauge someone's professionalism. And so we see this cycle where people who do contribute or are active are sometimes finding jobs a lot faster because folks are like, oh yeah, that person knows what they're talking about. At least want to go talk to them. So they pop up for a job application. You definitely have a leg up. And so it's this interesting like feedback loop of like people who are good at their, who are good in contributing and sharing are then getting, hired, and then they see that feedback loop, and then other people, they tell their story of how they got hired, and other people now start to replicate that. So I feel like we're almost entering a new era for some spaces or professions where it's like, if you have something that looks like this kind of community, you collectively get better because everyone's sharing how do you do the craft that is your day job, versus hoarding of knowledge, which is kind of historically how things work. Sam Jacobs from Pavilion talks about, the give to get mentality of, professionals. And I think these communities are reinforcing sort of that behavior so that we are getting, sort of sharing and getting better as a group, as a space, which is really encouraging because this is every one of our jobs, no matter which industry you're in, there's nuances that make it really hard. And so like learning from other people's experiences of like how to avoid the mistakes they made, it just makes all of us better, faster, which is really exciting.
I love it. And I also, so and this is something I've actually been thinking about too, is just like the concept of community becoming more of a channel or a source, an internal kind of channel or source or asset, if you will. Let me figure out which word I want to use. An internal asset for like startups and growth stage companies. So I know that there are some like big companies that might essentially have built communities for users and whatnot. But I'm wondering if that's going to become like a more regular motion in the tech industry for startups and growth stage companies where, okay, they're going to leverage partnership leaders, they're going to leverage, Pavilion, but they're also going to try to build their own internal community because there's just so many different value propositions. And I understand it's a massive lift, but so is building an outbound sales organization. I mean, like seriously, right? I mean, and so I think when we look at it from, okay, where's this budget going to go? What's driving revenue in 2023? And how do we align our revenue strategy with a more modern approach? Like, these are things that I'm thinking about. Like, am I going to put all this money into a outbound sales engine, or am I going to invest in podcast and community? Like, because when I look at our revenue sources, I'm looking at like referrals, relationships, like, upsells, like basically the people that we know in our community, right, that have leveraged us or know of us are the people that are driving revenue. So then it's like, well, how do we turn that into more of a scale motion? And I'm thinking like, well, let's build podcasts, community around podcasts. And let's think about, could we have some kind of like hiring success community where it's like we're investing in that? And to me, it's like there's a few things that I really love about it. It's like, one, it's a revenue driver, right? If you can have access to this community, you can drive revenue, right? Two, it's a recruiting driver, right? You also, like, I look at kind of almost my viewpoint of like being a CEO is I feel like I'm responsible for two demand gen engines: customer acquisition, talent acquisition. And my job is to optimize both of those things so that they can come together and I could scale a company. Like, that's just one kind of perspective or vantage point sometimes I look at my business. And so I feel like community can accomplish both of those things. And then plus it just positions you as the subject matter expert. Like, when you need expertise or insight on the latest technology or whatever, you can come to this community and get the answers you need. So anyways, I'm curious to get your thoughts on the concept of like community, starting to see more micro communities built out by startups and growth stage companies as like an internal asset.
Yeah, I think there's probably two different strategies here. One of them is you create your own community. So when I was at Optimizely, we created, which is a MarTech company that did experimentation.
I remember them. I remember
Yeah.
Optimizely. Did they get acquired? Whatever happened to them?
They got acquired.
Yeah.
So, but before we got acquired, they created this thing called the Optiverse, which is like their user community, and it was pretty cutting edge at the time. It was like 2013, 14 timeframe. But it was incredibly valuable because it was like both a customer sort of like product utilization oriented forum, but it was also a lot about strategy and like how do the professions that do experimentation, which was either product people or marketing folks, like how do they go about change management and all the things that are squishy and hard about experimentation. So there was like this interesting interplay between the online community component, the Optiverse, and then that subsequently made the Opticon. They loved everything with the you can see the naming theming here. Opticon, which was like the conference they held, but it was like this like sort of like 365 24/7 online thing that ultimately made the conference easier to pull in attendees because you could kind of bounce back and forth between the two environments. And so like I think it makes a lot of sense in my mind for mid-stage companies to invest in building some type of whether it's a forum or Slack environment or something that helps their customers engage with each other and find each other. I think the bigger piece, which is still very early days in how you operationalize this, is how do you use community to actually generate whether it's new talent or new revenue opportunities. And we see this inside partnership leaders where CEOs that have sort of picked up on the notion of like, you can't advertise yourself and what you do, but you can frame what you know in the trends in the industry in such a way that you can respond to other people, you can share insights, and you naturally look like you're at the forefront of how to do things. And so whether it's talent or potential customers, they start to gravitate towards you. How you sort of create a streamlined motion around this so that someone who's like the CEO and is very busy can actually do this repeatably is an interesting challenge. But it is, there are, in our space in particular, there's no better place for a partner technology company that sells to the partnerships industry to get visibility. And the same thing in all these other communities is, whether it's talent or revenue, this is way more effective than trying to send a whole bunch of SDRs cold calling people. But the key is, like, you've got to do it in an authentic way, because people will immediately sniff out if you're doing this in sort of a salesy type of way. And so there's an elegance to how you interact in these environments. But the companies that do it well, we do see them being very successful on both fronts.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you really have to be an expert in order to do this effectively too. Like, if it's more somebody like maybe that knows kind of the sales pitch or the value prop, but isn't able to get deep into, somebody asks a question, they probably want the tactical steps for implementation, or, hey, how do I really get started? Or, how does this work? Not just like, you can solve this type of problem by doing this high level thing, or like, something that's a little bit more vague and has it more, again, like focus on a value prop versus like implementation, or actually like, hey, this is how you like actually do the thing you need to do hands on. Like, this is, you could go, like, after reading this, you could go do it now. Right.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
that
The
type
more
of advice.
tactical kind of advice, the better. Or trends, like industry trends. Like, everyone loves to know what's going on. The folks that the technology companies that service these very professions, they probably have a lot of insights because of where they sit. And so it's like, how do you share that in a way that's helpful to everyone? The other angle to this is, like, these communities, yes, they're online, but increasingly in a kind of a post-COVID environment, a lot of us are doing field events because we have people in cities all over the world. We have 40 chapters and partnership leaders. A lot of these communities have concentrations of members in big cities, and it's quite, I wouldn't say easy, but it's definitely less friction for us to get those people to an event in one of these cities. Or, like last week I was in New York doing an event with a company called Ziff Solutions, where they rented a live axe place that was like throwing axes in Manhattan kind of thing. And it was actually, usually they're like barn type settings, but this is like very kind of high end.
So, did you have booze involved? The axe
definitely
throwing?
Yeah, I was like, there were
You're
like no high heels or open toe shoes. I was like, all right, that does make sense for this.
Did they have like hard liquor? Like, while you're
They
throwing?
did. I
Holy
don't know how they
shit.
have insurance.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, how do you connect? I mean, that sounds like a blast. Like,
It was a very good time.
right.
But it's like, for them, for this company that wanted to sell to the partnership industry, like, this was phenomenal. We have all these folks coming to this event. The members understand that because of this technology provider, the evening was possible. And so for, a company that's trying to recruit for folks, you can probably get your foot in the door with some of these communities, and the community can help you pull together a bunch of people in a city. So think of like ways to lean in and work with communities to get your brand in front of all these folks. And you'll find probably a pretty receptive audience if you engage with these communities through that lens.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's the thing that we've gone back and forth on too. It's like, we could just sponsor events, and the other communities have like already put in all this massive work to be able to pull together a relevant group of folks, right? So that's one of those things where I'm looking at like joining communities and then thinking about, is there a way we could do something very curated and specific to our buyer profile? And I think the answer is probably maybe both, is what we're kind of thinking through, is like, being part of other communities. It's just a different value proposition to us, like in terms of engaging with others. It's just an interesting concept of thinking about like how community is going to continue to change the game in terms of revenue generation, professional development, networking, hiring. It's like, I think it's like I think we're going to continue to see this as a trend. Like, I don't feel like this is going away. I think it's just, there's just going to be more communities. They're going to be more dialed in and niche. They're going to be driving probably a lot more of, I think there's just historically been a gap for professional development. like in every
Yeah.
industry, like for all time, right? Like there's just always been, you have like MBAs, which aren't going to really, like, you can't get an MBA and that to figure out like how to be a great partnerships leader for the tech industry. Like you're not going
Doesn't
to,
exist. Yeah.
right.
This space changes so quickly that within a year, your skill set is probably changed quite a bit. I mean, we have, so in our industry, in the partnership space, there are channel professionals that have been doing this for, 15, 20 years. Think of like hardware being sold through distributors and resellers and things like that versus like the SaaS world. And it's like the SaaS world really changed the game for, the partnership space. And so when we have people who come to the events or join the community that are versed in traditional channel partnerships, it's a whole different world. There's a very different language, different emotions, different incentives. And I'm sure every industry probably has similar sort of changes happening, and all this AI stuff is accelerating things. But yeah, I think like the root of this is like, it's probably not going away. The thing that you have to be cognizant of anybody who's wanting to employ a sort of a community-led growth strategy for their business is where, who's running the community, and like, is it a nonprofit? Is it a profitable business? Or for-profit business? And if it is a for-profit business, like how healthy are they? Because like running community is hard. Like you have to have really tight back-end processes to vet people. You have to have a lot of times sort of hand-built tooling. There's not a lot of off-the-shelf stuff to help you scale up a community. And so we do see, unfortunately, folks who are doing community part-time, they end up stopping because they're not
really
making
hard.
enough money. It's like, it's not sustainable for them, which is a real shame, because you end up losing, the infrastructure to support the community, and it goes away. And so I think that's the thing that's happening now, is like, there's a lot of movement right now of like communities that are sort of operationally sound versus ones that didn't quite get there. And, they just can't turn the corner on actually making it long-term sustainable business.
Yeah, that's like when we think about building something in-house, that's exactly why we haven't started, and why we're like really taking our time to see if like this is even something we would want to consider as a channel for us in-house, versus just leveraging great companies like yours that you've built and have dedicated full time for years, right, to get to where you are. Like it's like, do we really understand the lift that's required, and are we really committed? Like again, and it's a long-term play too. Like it could be, even if we do it the right way, a year or longer before it's actually adding any type of real value.
Yeah, that's 100%. I mean, we see this where we literally curated how people responded to questions. Like if we'd see questions that didn't have answers in the community, there's this feedback loop where it's like, if somebody asks something and they never get a response, and that happens more than once, they're probably going to leave. And it's like, so we would go in like, okay, I know that person over there knows about tech partnerships or cloud marketplaces or whatever it might be. And I'd be like, hey, this is your chance to share your experience. Like, I'd love for you to give your insights. And they'd be like, oh, great. Thank you for pointing this out. And they would go and respond. But we would do that like every day,
You were pushing it, like pushing engagement. I think the way
Yeah.
you said it, like when we spoke last time, was like, you're teaching people how to engage with the community.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Right?
The
Like
culture setting.
you're showing them the behavior that you're trying to like have them do organically, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then
Yeah.
this person's being too salesy. You reach out to them, you kind of help coach them. They can edit their message, and like there's this constant kind of shaping that's going on, that you end up in an environment that like people enjoy being in. It's not too noisy. That's the other challenge, is like, it's really easy for the train to come off the rails, because there's like gaggles of questions all over the place, and there's too much volume of stuff happening, and people are like, I can't deal with this. And they walk away. So yeah, I think like, to your original question of like, should you invest in your own community, or should you, work with one of these professional ones? I think if you go down the path of like investing in your own community, whether it's for customer acquisition or customer retention or recruiting, whatever the sort of rationale is, know that like you do need probably at least one full-time person that's working on this, and then some ancillary support staff around them that are domain experts. And as well as some allies, that is not just your employees, but like influencers in your space that come and hang out. You got to create a neighborhood that's worth staying in. Otherwise, you're going to look like a strip mall in the middle of nowhere.
Right. That's a good point. Yeah, there's a lot to it. So kudos to you guys for figuring it out and continuing to grow. It's been pretty cool to watch you guys grow.
It's been fun. I mean, it's like, it is a really, if anybody's thinking about building communities as a profession, it is incredibly rewarding. So I
Yeah, it's probably
encourage more
hard as hell
people to do
though.
it.
It's
But
probably I'm sure it's been a grind though. It's probably been very, very hard.
yeah, I mean, we did this literally also, we had full-time day jobs for a long time. So we were doing this in our spare time at night and on weekends and, between meetings sometimes, don't tell my former boss. But yeah, I mean, like the reality is like, it is something that when you can turn the corner and it's like, great, like this can actually sustain me financially. And I can commit my life to helping other people in our space get better at their jobs and be successful. Man, there's no better feeling, especially on the recruiting side in this environment where there's a lot of people that are out of work. Like I was on a member success call last week where, one of the women on the call was saying like, hey, you had reached out to me on LinkedIn and invited me into partnership leaders. And we have a free component for folks that are out of work where they have access to the jobs channel. And she was like, hey, I don't know if you remember, but like you invited me in, like that really brought me out of a kind of a dark place. And I was like, oh man, like, heart emoticon, you just feel good helping somebody out. And so, yeah, like this can be, life-changing for people if it's done the right way, which is what more could you want?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's and again, like what's interesting is I think community, particularly when we're seeing in the tech industry, it's incredibly valuable now. Like people need to be networking, getting out there, improving their skill set. So, yeah, I think it's all really good stuff. And thank you for taking the time to explain, have that part of the conversation. I want to transition now specifically to partnership teams. I want to help recruiting leaders, executive leaders, CEOs understand the proper way to think about partnerships and to get those a few initial hires right. So could you just like, for those of us that are not experts, help us just define exactly what a modern partnership program looks like versus maybe traditional channel sales, or maybe other misconceptions, right, about what partnerships really is.
Yeah, it's definitely more than chugs and hugs, which is the way that people talk about traditional partner folks is, oh, there's just the biz dev guy. He goes off and, hangs out with other companies and does his thing in the corner somewhere. And it's like, that is so far from the truth now of like a really, really good partner team is really engaging with all the parts of the business. So if you think about the best way to kind of sort of visualize this is the traditional channel teams were focused on almost like what we call transactional partners. It's like, how do I get my product to market? And there's like distributors and value-added resellers and all these folks that at the moment of that customer buying the thing, whether it's a server or a piece of software, there's a lot of focus on that sort of moment of transaction because it was like almost like an extended sales team for your business. And you could go take your product and, it was like, imagine when we were selling like CDs, especially, it's like, okay, cool. Like the thing, it's like, it's finished. I'm going to go find resellers to help me get this out into the market. SaaS just really shook that whole thing up because a few different reasons. One, your product's constantly changing. So like the partners have to be really close to you and close to the customer's needs. And so there's like, a lot of sort of acceleration around how quickly, whether it's pricing and packaging or the product functionality, et cetera. So there's a lot of co-selling. You'll hear this in the partnerships world of like, well, you have all these partners that are like helping us go to market and they're helping up and down sort of the customer life cycle. That's the other big piece of this is that as an executive that might be listening here, think about all the actors or potential partners, let's just say, around your business. You have venture capital firms, you have affiliate partners, maybe at the very beginning of the funnel, you have co-selling and co-marketing activities happening with partners. And then for an increasing number of companies, post-sale, sort of a co-success motion where it's like, I don't want to build a giant professional services team. It probably makes more sense for me to invest in a partner ecosystem so that I don't have to hire as many CSMs potentially, or I can redirect those resources to work on community, for example. So I think like that that entire customer lifecycle now, there are partners that can influence that. And so it's a broader range of actors that have to be orchestrated. And that is what a modern partnerships team is striving to do is, they're not off in the corner somewhere doing their own thing. They're deeply embedded working with all the other departments around them, as well as a lot, like sort of a broad range of partners that touch that whole life cycle.
I love it. And so when you get into specifically like hiring, I think that this is something where I think you mentioned before when we talked that a lot of companies are getting wrong. So could you talk to us about like that initial build out of the partnership team and go specifically more in depth when it comes to doing that initial build and getting those first few hires right?
Yeah, this is something that's like both exciting and sort of depressing at the same time, is like we have a lot of companies that are eager to build a partnerships team earlier in their customer and sort of the company life cycle. So in the past, you might have built out a sort of a channel team, later in, Series C, Series D, et cetera. We're starting to see more companies earlier, Series A, sometimes at the seed stage even, where they're like, we know our go-to-market motion is going to include partnerships. How do we start to build that muscle and hire for someone that can help us on that journey? The challenge is that a lot of times the questions are not asked about, are they actually ready to do this? So a lot of times earlier stage companies may not have their go-to-market motion figured out yet. And it's like, there's a lot of pricing and packaging changes that have to happen. There's, is the value proposition even really that, compelling? Is the marketing hitting the market? There's just like a lot of stuff. And so if you think about it, like if you don't have the answers to these questions, how are you going to have partners actually get out there and co-sell and co-market with you? There's just going to be a lot of probably friction, let's just say, with that process. So as a executive listening here, like be thinking about like, am I able to actually, if we hire this person, am I comfortable with the fact that this partner person, it may take them 6 months to a year to find the right go-to-market motion with these partners. They may need to like almost like A/B test, like, do we build tech partnerships? Do I go and try to find agencies and consultancies that can bring my product to market with me? And it's like really good partner people will, in essence, they're almost like a startup within a startup is the best way to think about them, is like, they need product marketing to get partners excited about working with your technology solution. Like they need a bunch of resources around them. And this is where people make the mistake, is they assume that if they hire one partner person and they just send them out to, with a briefcase, that they're going to get a bunch of revenue. And it's like, it's because you're sort of orchestrating lots of different partners at the whole customer, across the whole customer life cycle, and you're probably engaging with other departments in the business. You really have to have complete alignment that like you're going to invest in this as a business and you're going to give resources to the partner team to be able to actually get to their goals. And we see consistently a lot that doesn't happen. Like they're kind of like, they hire somebody, they're off in the corner by themselves and they don't have the resources, and the products maybe not ready to go to market at like a high velocity with partners. And so that's where we see a lot of challenges. They're just sort of like bad fit situations that occur over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things on that. Like one thing, when I'd be evaluating candidates, I would be really happy to see candidates asking those questions like, hey, do you have all of these things dialed in that you just mentioned, right? Because I feel like, somebody that really understands exactly what they need to be successful is more likely to be successful. I think just the flip side of that is, what are your thoughts on when somebody is hiring a partnerships person? Like, let's assume, well, hopefully, right, the company has the right go-to-market strategy to give them the insight that they need. What is the most important part of a partnerships, the first partnerships person's like skill set? Is it the relationships that they bring to the table? Is it their success in a relevant environment in the past? Or, I mean, what really is the core skill set that you need that person to have?
Yeah, that's a great question. It probably depends a little bit based on which industry you're in. I think
Sure.
the interesting thing is that like, at least in the SaaS world, is you could have somebody who worked in MarTech that understands how to build an agency network, or solutions partners, as we call them, or they've built technology partnerships, or they've built a cloud strategy. So in other words, like selling your software through the Amazon marketplace or Microsoft marketplace. you could know how to do that and actually almost like transfer those skills over to like a different, if you're in MarTech, you could bring those to like the cyberspace and potentially, help somebody build that muscle. Obviously, if somebody does have a background in that industry, they're going to have like a network, and then they can rock up with, okay, great. I know exactly the 15 agencies I'm going to call to go like test out, does this messaging and this product make sense for the people that are friendly to me? I did this when I went from Optimizely to Full Story, where I just, dialed up some of the folks that I did a bunch of business with. I was like, hey, check out this new hotness. What do you think? Does this seem like something you'd want to, bring to customers? And then you start to kind of peel back the onion of like, okay, like how would you build services around this? And so I think I wouldn't optimize too hard on like, did they come from our industry? Because a good partner person could probably transfer some of those skills. And if they know how to build the right value proposition, they can get the meetings with people to get in front of, whether it's service organizations or other tech partners. Also, hashtag this is where communities come in, because you can DM somebody that you might want to work with. But I think like I would optimize for someone for that first hire. Is like, does this person culturally seem like someone that can carry the weight of like the change management that has to happen to shift my business towards like a partner-led growth model, or, to like leverage partners the right way? Because they have to go around. Think about one example. Like if you wanted to take the approach of, hey, instead of hiring a bunch of CSMs, I want to bring in service organizations to do onboardings for our customers. You're going to have the partner person talk to the VP of customer success or the CRO and like make sure they're comfortable with this and go through all the process changes internally. And there's just a lot of change that has to happen to make that one aspect of partnerships work. And so I would be dialing in on like, how does this person fit in from like engaging with his peers, within my business? I wouldn't just have the partner person talk to the VP of sales, because if you think about the partner team as like, this person's only going to crank out a bunch of leads, they're like an Uber SDR. That is not the right way to think about a partner person. Like the right partner person should be engaging with all the departments, and they should be in some cases reporting either directly to the CEO or tucked in under the CRO, because they need to be, and this is my personal approach on this, is like they need to be servicing all these departments, equally to some extent. Revenue is a huge piece of it. They make sure they can, carry that torch, but don't have them sort of in a narrow lens of like, they're just going to crank out a bunch of leads for me, because that's just setting yourself up for, failure. And it's probably not what's going to get the candidate excited, because a lot of these folks are thinking about like sort of the modern ecosystem oriented way of doing partnerships.
Right. It sounds like an incredibly hard job.
It is challenging to some extent, because as I mentioned earlier, it's kind of like a startup within a startup. Like you test and figure out a bunch of stuff. It is so fulfilling though, because when it works, I mean, we've seen this over and over and over again, where people who figured out the right go-to-market motion, from a partnerships perspective, they have faster deal cycles, they have bigger deals, they have, higher retention because the customers are using integrations. There's like all these benefits. And if you can get the machine turning, you can literally change the course of a company's future if you have the right partner leader and partner team in place and you resource them the right way. You will crush your competition, because there's a lot of companies that screw this up. And we've seen this during, the last few months here, last 2 quarters, where people that don't understand how to leverage partnerships the right way, they're firing their partner team. And guess who hires them? Their competitor, who has an ecosystem or kind of partnership, oriented growth model. And now they're in trouble. Like you've just lost potentially dozens to hundreds of potential high influence actors or partners that customers, as we talked about this earlier, is like the way that people buy is changing. And it's like, you need people in your corner that are, that have the respect of a prospect, because they're going to go ask them, whether it's a tech company or a service organization, they're going to go do their homework. And if your AE is fighting alone out in the field, you're in trouble.
Yeah. Well, that's really good insight. And Chris, we're coming up on time here, but this has been very valuable. I know everybody tuning in is going to get a lot of value from this, and hopefully this is going to help guide hiring strategy for folks building out a partnerships team. So, Chris, I want people to be able to engage with you and your company. What's the best way that they can reach out if they want to learn more about what you guys are up to?
Yeah, absolutely. You can reach me on LinkedIn, of course, Chris Samila. And then our partnership leaders is just partnershipleaders.com. If anybody's interested in the sort of the partnership space in general, Catalyst is the annual conference we also run. So join catalyst.com. There should be about 1,000 partner professionals there. So if you need to recruit a really good partner person, come hang out at that event.
For sure. Where do you guys, where do you host that?
So it's in Denver, August 21st to the 23rd, and it'll be at the Hyatt out there. It'll be conference, expo, and then a bunch of cool Colorado stuff, hiking, tubing,
Are you
things
going
like
to
that.
be throwing axes this time, or?
Probably no axes, but all kinds of fun outdoor activities and Meow Wolf, which is like a crazy art museum thing. It'll be good times. So,
All right, cool. Nice. Good stuff. Well, hey, everybody tuning in, thank you so much for joining us today. If you'd like to be on the show or know somebody who'd be a good fit, we're accepting guests that are VPs of talent acquisition, chief people officers, founder CEOs of anything, people related companies. It could be something similar to what Chris does, or a software tool that sells to talent acquisition or people professionals, whatever it might be. We're really looking forward to hearing from you. Anyways, everyone, thank you so much. We are releasing a new episode every Tuesday and Thursday morning at 5 a.m. Eastern. So we'll see you next time. Take care.